Guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman, also known as a comeback coach. Guys, this is going to be a fun episode. They say don't ever meet your heroes. That's bullshit. Junaid has been one of my heroes for the last 5 years. Without him, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing today. And he actually helped me build my home studio, which is being rebuilt as we speak. So, guys, welcome to the show. We're going to be talking about everything podcasting, from the thought process all the way to building your own home studio. Junaid is a podcast host. He's a custom podcast studio builder. He's done it all, been there, done it. So, guys, it could be an amazing episode. Junaid, my brother, welcome to the show.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. It's been an honor knowing you over the past 5 years, and didn't know that we've been connected for so long, and I'm just so grateful to be here on the show.
I love it. And by the way, you got a beautiful family. I love everything you're doing. I love all the pictures from the trip you went on just recently. It looked gorgeous. It looked peaceful. So I just want to say I love you and I love your family. So my first question is, what is your definition of resiliency?
As a father of 4 kids, and resiliency is being able to wake up in the middle of the night to change the diaper of your baby who woke up from sleep, or feeding them food because they didn't eat enough before they went to bed. That's resiliency. Keeping an eye out on what's being asked of you. What's being asked of you, and how are you showing up every single day? So as a father of 14 years now with 4 kids, my oldest just turned 14 yesterday, and it's just amazing to see my own growth in all of that, right? And being resilient in that, being resilient and being a consistent reminder that these kids are depending on you, and we've got to be that person that they not only look up to, but they also follow our path, because we want to make sure that we provide them with the best, and being resilient in all of those phases and all of those situations is super important. So that's my little definition of what it means to be resilient.
But there's also times where your 14-year-old, like I got a 12-year-old, she drives me crazy. I can go downstairs into my studio and shut the door for a couple of minutes to find some peace, right?
That is true. That is true.
So tell us a little bit about you, where you come from, where did you grow up? Because obviously you're not from Brooklyn. You don't have that Brooklyn accent. So tell us a little bit about you, where you come from, and how you got into this crazy world of podcasting.
Absolutely. So I come from, I can go as far back as possible, but I grew up in Southern California from age 19 onwards. Before that, I was living in Saudi Arabia. Did all of my elementary and middle school and high school in Saudi Arabia. And then when I was done with all of that, I came to the States. My uncles were already here. So I was like, hey, this is the place I want to be. Went to college in SoCal, and I've been speaking English since, as far as I can remember. I was like probably from 5 years onwards, I was speaking English, because the school that I went to had English medium. So now if people who are not from the U.S., they're coming from different countries, they might have different medium of teaching. So the school that I went to in my elementary school was English medium, and there was also Urdu medium classes, meaning all of the instructions was in Urdu language, or all of the instructions was in Arabic language, even mathematics, right? So I went to English medium, so I've been speaking English for so long, and having parents and having uncles in Southern California and speaking that language, it kind of like leaned on, rubbed off on me, and so I have a little bit of that California accent. So growing up in the States, now my dad comes from a programming background as well. So he's a computer programmer, and watching him use the computer got me interested in using the computer myself. Now, when I moved to the States, I got my very first computer. I broke it down, I assembled it, I made it bigger, and I was basically tech inclined since the very beginning. And in 2003, I was blogging already. I was creating websites for people. And when I learned about the podcast space in 2005 or 2012, I was listening to these podcasts, but I didn't know too much about it until in 2012. I was like, hey, let's launch a podcast. So myself, my brother-in-law, and my cousin, we launched a podcast called Still Brewing It. And it's funny because we ended up doing like 4 episodes in 2012, and we couldn't continue because the technology like this was not available. We had to piece everything together, and it was the start of, our journey into podcasting. And it wasn't until actually 2018 that I jumped back into podcasting. I listened to Gary Vee's advice. He's like, hey, just document your journey. Don't worry about the story. Just document it and get creating. And that's what I did with documenting my journey on the podcast. And ever since, I've interviewed a ton of people on the podcast, and it's been a lot of fun. And that's how I got into podcasting.
And like I said, if it wasn't for you, my new book drops in May. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be able to do what I do, because you made me push, because I was doing audio first, and then I seen you doing video, and I'm like, oh, come on. And then you were doing horizontal, and then you started doing vertical, and I'm like, oh, come on. So I've been trying to learn from you to learn how to be the best podcaster I can be. So thanks, I just want to say thank you for that, my friend.
Absolutely, absolutely. You just got to keep testing the waters, keep testing what's working and where the market is, where the attention is going, right? Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, it's the attention economy. Where's the attention going? Where are people watching? Where are people standing in the aisles to watch what's coming up? And vertical is where it's at right now. And what's funny is almost a decade ago, I saw these videos come up, and they were basically public service announcements talking about how our eyes are next to each other, side by side. So vertical video is something that you don't want to do. But lo and behold, something called Snapchat changed the entire world with vertical video, because a ton of people were consuming content on the phone, which was vertical. So they're obviously creating content that's also vertical. And that's where we're at 10 years later, people pushing more and more vertical video.
And, and obviously with YouTube Shorts, going a lot of vertical. So I think vertical is great. But then when Hormozy started coming out with his videos and all the letters starting to pop, that's when you started seeing everybody doing the same thing. And I guess, like you said, wherever the attention is, that's where you have to go. Yeah. But you also have to have your own voice. Like, I can't be another Gary Vee. I can't be another Junaid. I got to be Richard. So talk about that. It's finding your authentic voice.
100%. And the way you find your authentic voice, the way you put that out in the world is by being yourself and telling your story, your way of running your life. Because we all have experiences, right? And what your experiences are totally different than what my experiences are and what we go through. So sharing those personalities and the things that we love to do is what connects us with the people that are watching us.
Okay, so let's talk about podcasting, because I know the stat changes on a daily basis, but I think like the average podcast lasts 12, 13 episodes somewhere on, and then there's pod fade, and then they're gone because podcasting is work. It takes a lot of work in order to set up a podcast, invite guests if you have guests, do the editing, the audio, and all that. So why do you think that so many people have pod fade or just fade out after 12 or 13 episodes?
Well, one thing you got to realize is that the entire podcasting industry has seen a very slow growth. And when I joined podcasting in 2018, there was probably around 600,000 podcasts in the entire world. Now, pod fade terminology came to being only after the pandemic hit. Now, during the pandemic in 2020, about 2.5 million new podcasts emerged because people are at home. They're like, hey, what are we going to do? Let's talk to each other. Let's create a podcast. And that's where 2.5 million podcasts came. Now, a lot of people that started podcasting back then still continued on because they love to do it and they found the right ways to continue to create those podcasts. But other people, they either went back to their jobs, they went back to pre-pandemic situation, or they're like, you know what, it was great while it lasted. We created conversations, but now I need to move on. So it's almost like you go to college and then you're done with college and now you're on to the next thing. And I think there's a lot of that you'll see in the podcasting space. Now, there are a lot of technologies, there are a lot of software right now available, especially now in 2024, that enable podcasting, that make podcasting so much easier than it was 3-4 years ago. So again, it all comes down to what was the thing that they were doing with the podcast? What was it doing for them? And what type of podcast were they doing? Was it a solo podcast? Was it an interview podcast? Was it a fiction podcast? I mean, Disney is launching a whole new podcast around the Frozen movie series, which is going to be mind-blowing. And I saw this last year at Podcast Movement that a Frozen podcast is coming. I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be so cool because they're bringing in all the voices. They're bringing all the production that they have. So again, it all comes down to what type of podcast is it that they're going to be running.
Okay, but now also, I taught on my course, I teach people, that podcasting has such a low cost barrier to get in.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as expensive as if you want to start a high quality YouTube channel. But, YouTube, I think there's like a million videos uploaded every day. Mm-hmm. So you have to compete with so many more YouTubers than you would if you got into the podcast realm. Do you agree with that?
That is true because again, if you look at the stats, there's a total of quote unquote 5 million podcasts, of which 345,000 are actively established podcasts, meaning they're continuing to produce new content. Whereas if you look at the YouTube channel space, there's probably 37 to 40 million YouTube channels in existence. Maybe that number is much larger now. But even of that number, maybe around anywhere from 10 to 5 to 2% of those YouTube channels are at the state where you can call them, okay, they are successful. They're over 1,000 subscribers or they're over a 10,000 subscriber number. But it is a lot cheaper to start a podcast. But even if you look at podcasting now, YouTube video is becoming more and more apparent because the Gen Z is consuming these podcasts on YouTube. They're consuming the podcasts on Spotify. They're watching the video. And forget the Gen Z, even the silent generation or the older generation over 70s, they're like, hey, I'm watching TV and I would rather watch a podcast than listen to it because they have that free time. So again, you got to look at what's the demographic that you're creating this content for and where is this demographic going to be listening to your podcast? Are they going to be on a run listening to this podcast? Are they going to be commuting, right? So entire demographics have changed. The entire world has changed because of what the pandemic did and the remote work and the gig economy. So there's a lot of different things that you got to look at. And again, the more specific you are of who your audience is, the much easier it's going to be for you to create the content, what the type of content for the audience that is listening to you.
And I agree. Now, the reason why I got a 20-year-old, I got a 18-year-old, and I got a 12-year-old, and I constantly watch what they're watching. What are they doing? What gets them? Why are they watching? And I'll ask them, why are you watching this video? Why do you stay on the channel? And a lot of them tell me, well, I won't watch a video if it doesn't have auto captions. Because my kids say a lot of times I'm watching TV, but I have YouTube off.
Yeah.
And if they don't have captions going, I'm just so how important are closed captionings on videos now?
Well, the cool part is a lot of these apps, a lot of these services have automatic closed captioning enabled, meaning they're using AI to listen to the audio. And again, that's where audio is so important. So you want to make sure, even if you're doing a video podcast, you want to make sure your audio is super crisp and super legible so that it can automatically be transcribed. I think YouTube is doing that. Spotify is doing that, as well as our Apple Podcast has recently coming out with a version, or in the latest podcast version, where it'll automatically transcribe the audio version of your podcast into text so that you can read it. So again, yes, text is super, super important. And those captions that you showed, the pop-up captions that you see, that makes it really stand out, your video content, so people can read it. Like even when I'm consuming content, I have the audio turned off, and I'm just watching these videos or reading the text rather, unless it's something very intriguing, then I'll turn up the audio. So yeah, those automatic captions are super important, and you want to make sure that your audio is really clean.
And one thing I love that with Streamyard, I'm a big Streamyard guy. I love Streamyard. I think I have over 1,000 videos on Streamyard.
That's amazing.
But now they just came out with something new. They're beta testing where it'll actually transcribe your whole thing, and you could just copy and paste it into ChatGPT to make your liner notes within 10 minutes instead of having to take 2 to 3 hours transcribing something. They're even making it even easier for you to do, right?
That is very true, and that's something that I've been doing for the past few years as well, because I want to make sure that I'm providing the most accurate information to the SEO crawlers and the people who are visiting the website to say, hey, this is what I'm going to expound or extract out of this podcast, and here's all the show notes and whatnot. So yes, having that transcribed and being able to bring it to ChatGPT makes it so much more easier.
Now, how important is it? Because I believe it's very important to be part of Facebook groups that are for podcasters, be friends with podcasters, go on other podcasts, but also go to events and to hang out with podcasters and find out what's going on in the industry. Because you just got back from one, right?
Yes, so I was at PodFest earlier this year. It was a lot of fun. Got to meet a ton of people that I've known over the years, and even recorded some in-person interviews, because you start the connection with guesting on each other's podcasts, and then you build that relationship over time, and it's almost like you've known this friend for so long, right? It's really fun when you're going to these events. Now, what you mentioned, going to these events or being in other groups of podcasters, it's a feeling of community. It's a feeling of, hey, I'm having trouble with this thing on my podcast. Surely there's somebody out there that have already solved that problem or know a solution that you can quickly access that information.
And one thing I love about podcasting, like I had my friend Jordan Mendoza, he's a LinkedIn guru.
Mm-hmm.
And as we were doing the interview yesterday, I pulled up my phone and we were changing things on my LinkedIn profile as we're talking.
Yeah.
So it's great that if I don't know something, I can say, hey, Junaid, how do I set this up? How do I set my lighting up? How do I do it? And if I may not be able to afford to fly out to you, but I can say, hey, Junaid, why don't you come on the show and teach us all what you do? So it's kind of like it's just creating value, right?
100%, 100%. You're not only just creating value, but you're also building that relationship with between the guest and the host. And if you have co-host, then you're building a relationship with two other people. It's just really powerful way to communicate. I mean, human beings were meant to work together, talk with each other, and that's podcasting has just made it that much easier.
So, okay, somebody wants to start a brand new podcast. What are some of the do's and the don'ts of starting a new show?
Well, don't start a podcast if you just want to start a podcast for the sake of starting a podcast. Do start a podcast if you have a message worth sharing. You have a burning desire. You want to teach something. You want to create value, or you want to, create a podcast as a legacy for your children to follow, as something that's going to live on for much longer, than you would. So I actually wrote an article a couple years ago that talks about, hey, this is what you want to think about when you're launching a podcast. And your book, will talk about very similar things too, but it all comes down to, hey, what's your message? What type of podcast is it going to be? How much time commitment do you have to put into it? Looking at the logistics of what it's going to take to launch that podcast, equipment that you're going to use, and are you going to have guests on there or not? So again, thinking of all the different things before you start the podcast makes it so much more easier than jumping the gun and starting it from scratch like I did.
Okay, because like my mentor is Mr. John Lee Dumas. Somebody might have heard of him. He's got a little podcast,
just a little
called
podcast.
Entrepreneurs on Fire. He's actually writing the foreword to my new book.
Nice.
And something that he taught me was, before you even start, make sure you know who your perfect avatar is. Make sure that you go an inch wide but go a mile deep on trying to find out who your perfect listener is. Because I think Jim Rohn said it, if you're marketing to everybody, you're marketing to nobody.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about how important finding your avatar is.
That's a beautiful question, and something that I mentioned earlier, right? Figure out who the audience is that you're creating this content for. Figure out where they're hanging out. Are they hanging out on Instagram? Are they hanging out on TikTok, on Facebook, or YouTube? Once you know where they're hanging out, then you know what type of content you will be creating. Then you'll know where you'll be publishing this podcast. And figuring out who that specific person is. For example, my podcast started as me documenting my beekeeping journey. So it's definitely for somebody who's thinking about beekeeping and they want to start into beekeeping. And they start with listening to this podcast. Oh my God, this is how you start to become a beekeeper. Are you a parent? Are you somebody who's has a desire? Somebody in your family has allergies and whatnot. So that's where I started. So figure out who that person is that you want to attract with this content. Who is it that you're going to help? Are they going to be interested in your personality? Because is your personality going to be a value added to the information that you're going to be sharing? Again, like John Lee Dumas said, like you mentioned, figure out who that perfect persona is, perfect avatar is, and talk to their wants and needs and problems that they might be facing.
Like he told me, my perfect avatar is who I was 5 years ago and who I'm going to be 5 years from now. That's my perfect avatar.
Yeah.
I can't, because I'm a ninth grade dropout. I can't, certain people are not going to listen to me because I don't speak in certain vocabulary. Right. But the people that do listen to me, we speak the same language. And I think sometimes a lot of people, if they're an older podcast, they try to go too young and they totally miss the boat. Or if they're too young, they try to get an really older demographic and they kind of miss the boat. So I think you should be in like maybe a 5 or 10 year difference either way. What do you think?
No, I totally agree, because it's almost like the example that I give is the people who are going to follow you are going to be on the same freeway as you. They're not going to be on a different freeway because they don't even know where you are. They don't even know if you exist. So if you're in a car and you're on the road, you're going to follow somebody that's in front of you. You can't follow somebody that's 5 miles ahead, but maybe 3 car lengths ahead. That's almost like 3 years ago, away from where you are now. You can follow them pretty easily because the road is clear. You're in this single lane or even the 2-lane highway. You can come up and understand what's going on. Again, people who are around you, next to you, they can relate to you, because if there's an accident coming up, if there's a fire truck coming behind you, you can relate to each other and like, hey, we got to move over to the side. There's a fire truck coming. So again, that kind of gives you an idea of where you are, which freeway you are. And the reason I love to talk about freeways, because growing up in California, there's a ton of freeways all the time. You're sitting in traffic. Yeah. So I was like, hey, this makes sense. And all of us here in the U.S. have driven on freeways. So it kind of makes sense to use that as metaphor, as relating to hates. And the entrepreneur journey is, you're getting in a car, which off-ramp are you going to take an exit on? How are you going to get on the freeway? So figuring out those things to say, hey, this is where I'm at, this is what I'm teaching, and these are the people who understand what I'm talking about.
Okay, but now also, like Alex and Layla Hermosi talk about in her latest books, that the riches are in the niches. But also you should have a niche that's big enough that you can actually build a business in. If you have a niche that's dying or not even growing, right, I think then that's kind of a bad business model. So what are your thoughts on doing as much research as you can on your subject, and then to see if it's scalable or if people are even searching for it anywhere?
No, you're absolutely right. You got to know which niche you're going into, if there's a marketing demand for it. Like if you started, people come to me and they're like, oh my God, I have this great idea and nobody's doing it. It's the perfect idea. I'm like, well, if nobody's doing it, that means that, nobody has a need for it. Because why are there more coffee shops out there in the U.S. than there are tea shops? Because people want coffee more than they want tea. Sure, tea is kind of like an add-on, but coffee shops are all around because people have a demand for it. So you got to figure out the supply and demand of what is the thing that people are wanting. And if you look at grocery stores, I just like to take examples of things that you can actually access and be in front of. Check out grocery stores. You'll see the cereal aisle. There's so many different types of cereal, and for everybody, there's a different cereal. So again, you gotta figure out in your market, whatever you're trying to do, you gotta make sure that there's a demand for it, and that people are going to come and buy that product, because they're already spending money on that product. So now it's just a matter of you convincing them, or you impressing upon them that your product is better. And that's why Mr. Beast's chocolate sold so many bars, because it's a product that people are already buying, and because people know Mr. Beast and they're like, hey, I already like chocolate. Hey, Mr. Beast has a chocolate. Let me grab some Mr. Beast chocolate.
Yeah, and just just like with Prime drinks, Prime energy drinks,
Yeah,
and then Mr. Beast came out with Mr. Beast Burger here in New Jersey at the mall.
yeah,
So, but it all started with one idea, and then it branched out. So okay, so let me
100%.
ask you. Okay, so now you find your perfect avatar, you find your niche, and for me, when I started with an iPhone. I started on
Mm-hmm.
Anchor. It was
Mm-hmm.
audio only because it was
Yep.
very easy for me to do. And now we went to Spotify, and now we're doing no video.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I believe that a lot of people, they have such a paralysis by analysis
Mm-hmm.
that they do nothing. Instead of saying, okay, maybe I'm gonna buy a cheap laptop. I don't need the best camera to
Mm-hmm.
start, but I need to start because I'm a big Gary V guy, and
Mm-hmm.
he helped me get started. But some of his most watched videos were made at a yard sale
Yeah.
with a flip cam,
Mm-hmm.
and it has 30, 40, 50 million views. So talk
That's
about
right.
stuff that you do need to start a podcast.
You know, the stuff that you need is already in your pocket. Like you said, you started your podcast on an iPhone using the Anchor app, or now
Mhm.
Podcasters by Spotify.
Yeah.
Um, that's exactly how I started too, and it was simple. It's easy to do. I jumped in my car, recorded my first episode called "Bee Queen Bee." You can still go and listen to it. I didn't even know what I was going to name my podcast, but like I said, don't take my advice on how I did it. Figure out who your audience is going to be, and focus on that. So number one thing, you want to make sure that you have the best audio you can acquire for the budget that you have. And amazingly, there's a ton of tech available on Amazon right now that you could purchase for under $50 to $60. That'll give you a really good microphone. And the reason that you want really good audio is because people will recognize you in person without even looking at you from your voice. I was at this event, a dinner party, about a year and a half ago, and as I'm talking to the folks around me, one guy leans back and he's like, "Junaid, were you in Chris's meetings past few weeks?" I was like, "Yes, I was." Like, dude, I recognize you from your voice because I paid attention to my audio, to my microphone, to my setup, so that I can create the type of content, create the type of media that people can recognize me when I'm out of the studio as well. So you want to make sure that you have the best microphone that you can afford uh, for creating your audio podcast.
Okay, and I agree because like I love watching movies, and a lot of times I'll be watching a movie and I'll hear somebody's voice and I'll be like, I don't know the face, I know that voice.
I know the voice. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think like when I first started, I listened to my old podcast and I still do, and I'm like, man, I said 13 times. I'm
Yes.
you go back and you're like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't say it this way. Maybe I should say it that way. But I
Yeah.
think, audio, like you said, if you have bad audio, they're just going to swipe. They're not even going to
There's
watch it. Even if it's all cracked up, they're not even going to watch it. It gets annoying.
absolutely. It does. It
So,
does get annoying. You want to switch that channel as quick as possible.
okay, now with the brand new iPhones, a lot of them have amazing cameras. A lot of them
Mm-hmm.
have amazing microphones, but I realized that I still needed another mic to make it sound really, really crisp, right?
Absolutely, because what the camera's doing, depending on which software you're using to record the video, um, the cameras, the microphones might cut down the audio, the external audio, the external noise. You might have built-in canceling, depending on the software that you're using, but it might not also. So again, you want to test the different sounds that you're getting when you're recording using the iPhone, and even iPhone's so good, the camera's so good that Apple actually used one of their iPhone 15 Pros to shoot their entire event, all with about a 30-minute event that they should put together, all on the new iPhone. So it means that the camera quality is really good. They still used external audio to capture, really well isolated audio. So
Okay,
again,
so let's talk about
test.
For me, I love interviewing people. I love being a guest, but I do not like doing solo episodes.
Mm-hmm.
I can't 3 minutes in and I'm like, I got nothing, guys. So for me, I don't do very many solo. So
Sure.
talk about the importance of figuring out what kind of show you want to have.
Absolutely. So I've in my blog post that I wrote a couple of years ago, I've listed 8 different types of podcasts that you can have. Right. So number 1 is a solo podcast. Number 2 is a co-hosted podcast. So you have 2 hosts, and you're basically having a back and forth conversation. It could be about anything at all. Right. A friend of mine launched a podcast. It was all around mental health, and they talked about movies and mental health and how movies have a huge aspect of mental health. One of the hosts was a podcaster. The other host was an actual psychologist, doctor. So they basically talked back and forth, and they talked about movies. Number 3 would be an interview-based show, something like what we're doing right now. Number 4 would be teaching specific topics. So there, and you probably know about this too. John Lee Dumas has a few podcasts where he teaches you how to podcast, or where he teaches you how to do different things. And those are short-run podcasts. So those are something, again, you could do like a 10-episode podcast or a 12-episode podcast, and it talks about a very specific topic. And those are almost like an audio course. Number 5 is a fiction-based short-run series. Now, fiction-based meaning it's based off of a book. You're reading a book and you're creating it as a memoir or side stories of what's happening. For example, anytime Apple TV Plus has a TV show, they launch a podcast on side of it where the director, some of the actors will come on and they talk about the episodes, they talk about the show. So those are another types of podcasts that you can do. Then, of course, there's marketing-based podcasts where you're just marketing your product, your services, and whatnot. And again, there's a lot of these podcasts that can be intermingled, these types, because you can do a lot of this. Like a lot of these podcasts are essentially you're marketing one way or another who you are. Then again, there's video podcasts, which could be all of them or none of them. And my favorite one is storytelling podcast for kids. There's a lot of podcasts that are all around telling a story, or you're reiterating different ways to teach kids of different stories and whatnot. So again, figure out what type of podcast you want to do, and then do some research, put some work in, write some scripts, and there's a ton of resources out there that can help you do the scripting, figure out what it is. And like you mentioned, Richard, earlier, you can take the transcript of your podcast interview, put it in ChatGPT, and it'll give you all of the show notes that you can then put on the website. Well, you can do the reverse also. You can say, hey, I'm thinking about launching a podcast about this topic, and I want to focus on this target audience. What should I talk about? What are some of the topics? And then ChatGPT will give you ideas, will give you titles and whatnot. And you can go deeper and deeper and deeper until you are satisfied with what it came back with. Now you're good to go and start recording that episode.
Okay, so now you record an episode, or you record it on your phone or wherever, and then you got to figure out, am I going to put it on Spotify? Am I going to put it on any of these other Podbean or anything like that?
Right.
And I'm the worst. I tell everybody this, and they don't believe me. I'm the worst podcaster in the world. I had a podcast that was called Success Your Why, Powers Your How.
Mm-hmm.
300 episodes recorded and uploaded onto Anchor, never realizing it never went on to iTunes.
Oh, wow.
And they were good. I called them up and I'm like, I need to get these onto, and they're like, yeah, you have 300 hours. We're not going to transfer it. So I had to start all over again with my new podcast.
Wow.
So
Oh my God.
talk to us about picking a good hosting service.
Yeah, so you want to pick. There's a lot of different hosting services. There's Libsyn that has been around the longest. There's of course Anchor or Spotify podcasters. There's Captivate. There's Podbean, Spreaker, Kajabi, Buzzsprout. Like all of these are hosting providers for podcasting, and it enables you to, upload your audio. So then it's available to all of these other syndicated platforms. Now you want to, what I tell everybody is, as soon as you set up your account on Anchor or wherever, you want to, number one, record a trailer for that podcast so that it starts to, so that the company can start the process of pushing these content or pushing that trailer out to all of the different platforms that they syndicate to. Now, podcasting started as is built on top of RSS, which is real-time, a real syndicated service or something like that. I can't even remember, but that's what it's built on top of. So as soon as one place, or as soon as your host has a new episode, it'll send out a signal to all of the different places that, hey, there's a new episode available. Come back here and grab it. So that's what it's built off of. So you want to make sure that you, as soon as you think of launching the podcast, create a trailer and post it up there so that it's readily available on all the platforms when you do launch your podcast.
Okay, but now I also found that, because like any other social media, whatever platform you put it on, a lot of times they want to keep you on their platform as long as possible.
Right.
So they're not gonna put as much energy into pushing your stuff out as you should. And I found that in the book I actually put it, there's like 30 different places you can manually put your RSS feed so it gets seen out there. So how important is that?
I mean, it's really important it's as important as where your people are going to hang out. So if your people are hanging out on, let's say, LinkedIn, you want to make sure that you're also posting that video or that audio on LinkedIn, or share to the people that, hey, I have my podcast here. Again, podcast was initially designed for owners of iPod to be able to download audio on their iPods and listen to it on the go. And that's where the name podcast comes from iPod. So again, that was back then, but now it's a totally different world where, we're almost 15 to 20 years from the initial iPod that came out. And it's a totally different world. So people will either be hanging out on YouTube, they'll be hanging out on all the different platforms. As long as you have as long as you know where your people are hanging out and you're posting the content on that space, that's all that matters for your podcast.
Okay, and I actually love that. And like you were talking about earlier, that everybody consumes content differently. Like some people like video. Some people I like when I'm going on my walks in the morning, I listen to podcasts through Audible. That's what I use. Yeah. So everybody has a different learning modality. So you have to learn to get on a lot of different platforms and post your podcast, but maybe in different ways, like on YouTube, maybe Reels, on Instagram Reels or YouTube Shorts, or TikTok. So talk about that, is how you can't put the same video 8 different places because the platform wants native content. So talk about native content.
Absolutely. So what native content is, you want to create content specific to that platform alone. Meaning, for Instagram Shorts, you want to create a short snippet of your entire episode. You might not put an entire 40-minute, 30-minute episode on an Instagram Reel, although I have seen people do that. But you want to put a small snippet so that people come back to the main platform, listen to the rest of the episode. They come back to the main place where the entire episode is listed. So you can do that by taking out snippets, taking out the really cool points, the cool gems that you learn in a podcast, and you post that on the different platforms. It's almost like you're sending an ad. You're playing an ad on ABC. You're playing an ad on NBC. You're playing an ad on Fox, and those ads basically telling people, "Hey, come over here if you want to listen to the rest of the episode." And that's essentially the idea behind social media. You're giving them a taste, and then people are following you, and they're like, "Okay, I want to listen to a little more of that," and then they're coming back to the main platform, whatever that be, to listen to the rest of the episode. So you want to utilize as much as possible of creating that native content, creating that and posting it on the different platforms so that they come back and listen to the episodes.
So then how important is, because like I said, you go to these events all the time, and I know they talk about it because I've been to a few of them, about how important a headline is, how important a thumbnail is, and also how important, a couple short hashtags are. How important are those things? Because sometimes I think in order to get them to click on something, the headline's got to be great, or they have to have a great thumbnail or something to get them to click. And so Talk to us about those three things.
So having a good thumbnails, again, brings you audience that is brand new to your channel. And that's something that Instagram, that's something that YouTube is always testing. They're like, okay, how good is the thumbnail? How many new people are coming to this channel? How relevant is the content that you're sharing? Because again, these services are transcribing the content. They know the message that goes in there, and they're able to place that video next to video that makes sense, that have the same kind of messaging. So as they do that, they'll bring new, fresh blood to your podcast. And that's where thumbnails and headlines totally make sense. If you already have a set of subscribers, let's say if you have 100 subscribers, you have 200 subscribers, those followers and those subscribers are going to listen to your content no matter what the headline is, because they're already dialed into who you are. They're already dialed into the content that you create, the interviews that you're having. But the thumbnails, the headlines, they're really good for bringing in new, fresh blood, new, fresh listeners into your podcast. So you want to make sure that you test all of that. And there's several tools out there that enables you to test the thumbnails. In fact, you can run A/B testing on all of the platforms. Hey, I have these two thumbnails that I want to test, and they'll run a quick test for you. And they're like, okay, this headline is getting more views. We're going to push this one more.
Okay, now, are hashtags even a thing anymore? Because I have a lot of people say, I don't use them. Then I have some people say, well, I put 30 on Instagram. And then some people say, well, only put 3 on YouTube. So what is the real deal now? Because today it is 24. It's at the end of February. So what is the deal with hashtags right now?
So hashtag was a really cool way that Twitter came out with to connect the different content, the different types of conversation that were happening. And this is pre-AI. This is not pre-AI, but pre-intelligence being put into read and look at all of the context and all of the stuff that's going inside of all of the content that was being posted. But now hashtags are just a way to collect all of your stuff together in one place so that you can click on that hashtag and like, hey, here's all my stuff that you can quickly go to. So people can follow that hashtag and like, hey, I want to see any time the comeback coach is posting a content, I want to see that content. So people can follow specific hashtags. And if you want to present your content in front of other hashtags or other new audiences, again, you can use hashtags new podcast. So you can use hashtag entrepreneurship, or you can use hashtag that's specific to your content. So people that are already following those hashtags can then see your content as it shows up. So the reason...
So does it go in the description, or does it go in the title?
It always goes in the description, because that's where they're looking for it. In Instagram, it's, of course, you just have a caption. You don't have a title. You just have a caption. So you'd put the hashtags there. For YouTube, again, in the description. If you put it in the description, then it'll show up on top. And the reason they say 3, because you don't want it cluttered. You want to say, hey, what are the 3 main topics that you're talking about on this YouTube video? And then they'll then also show that content associated with, or basically, you'll show up under recommended videos or recommended search results.
Okay, then. So now after you've been doing this a while and you start upgrading, you start getting new monitors, new computers, new microphones, and you want to take it to the next level, that's when you hop on the phone and talk to Junaid and be like, hey, bro, I'm ready to build my own studio. What do I do? So talk to us about when a person should get to that point and what their next step should be if they want to have their own home studio.
Absolutely. So my favorite thing is to minimize your spend, right? Minimize what you have to put in to create a award-winning podcast, and that comes down to how efficient can you be with the equipment that you already have. Now, I'm in a basement, so I needed lighting, and I want to make sure that I sound good, so I got the microphone. And because I come from the film background, I already had these cameras that I can use as webcams that give me really high quality video. Now, where do you start? I start with the analysis of your room. Figure out what in your room, where do you have windows, where do you have doors, and what's showing in your shot. Now, if you've seen my videos from 3, 4, 5 years ago, you'll see these huge windows up here in my shot because I loved what I saw when I set up my room, but I never looked through what the camera saw because the camera sees behind us. And over time, I was like, okay, now that I'm ready, let me switch the room around. So now my window's in front of me, and I have this nice background or a bookshelf behind me with all these action figures and whatnot. So that's what the camera saw, and I wanted to design the stage for the camera. Now, a lot of the times in Hollywood movies and TV shows, they stage the shots. They block the shot out to say, hey, this is all that we want to show you in this shot that we're showing you. And you've probably seen sitcom sets of Friends and Seinfeld, where they have the whole scene set up, and the cameras are set up in such a way that you only see what they want to show you. And that's exactly what we're doing in your home studio when we're setting up for the camera. So we analyze the room, we figure out what you want in that room, figure out the lighting situation, figure out the audio, we treat the room, go through the whole thing step by step to understand, hey, this is what the look that we want, and this is what we want to create in the space.
So, but is there a certain point that you should reach before you decide that you want to have a home studio, or you can just start off right out the gate and create a home studio?
Well, it all comes down to what budget you have and what you're going to get out of the entire podcast. If your podcast is starting as a as a marketing for your business, Well, guess what? There's budgeting or there's funding available from the government for your business for marketing purposes. And this could be a marketing play for you as a business owner, for you as as somebody who's creating content for you. Plus, what's also doing is it also showing you that you are serious about your business. You're serious about your content that you create for the people that are following you, right? So it's a lot of different things. It's almost like when you go to a party, depending on what you want to show off, you're gonna either show up in a t-shirt, you're gonna show up in a tux, you're gonna show up in the different levels based on your comfort level, right? So once I've got the setup, I can show up in a t-shirt and I'm comfortable because I'm comfortable with myself. But again, it all comes down to how comfortable are you in front of the camera and where you want to take the whole situation.
And isn't it true that if you do have a home built studio and it's made specifically for business or podcasting, I mean, you're not a tax guy, so I'm not a tax guy, he's not a tax guy, but I know that I'm able to write a part of my mortgage off, a part of my internet service off, my phones, my laptops. So it can be used as a business expense if you do it the right way, correct?
100%. 100%, yeah.
So then what has Junaid got going on? How do we get you to come and set up our home office?
So I work with my clients a few different ways. One of them is I give them an instruction, virtual instructions. I'll design their room based on their photos that they share with me in 3D model it out, just like those HGTV shows that we watched. And like, hey, this is how we would remodel your room. We'll take this wall down. We'll put this new bathroom, blah, blah, blah. So I use a similar software to showcase, hey, this is what your studio could look like once you work with me. So I work with them virtually. I work with them. I have a course that walks them through, hey, this is what I should be thinking about. This is all the gear that I need. Work with them virtually. And, of course, I can also fly out to my clients' locations and set up their studios and their technology so that they don't have to try to figure out all the things on their own.
So then how do we get the courses, or how do we sign up to have you mentor us and teach us?
Absolutely. So my website is homestudiomastery.com. People can go and learn more on that site. There's a quick four-point call that they can make with me, and then I can walk them through, hey, this is how we can transform your home studio.
Okay, now if somebody's not ready to make that step yet, they can also follow your podcast.
Correct.
Or follow your podcast too.
Yeah, they can check out my podcast on hacksandhobbies.com where I've interviewed other guests on the podcast talking about their journeys. I've got a few videos on my YouTube channel that talk about studios, and I've got a few articles as well on homestudiomastery.com that talk about, hey, here's the 10 different things that you could be thinking about for your podcast. Here's the 5 things that you can use in your studio. Here's the best microphones. Here's the best. So they have different lists and everything as articles available on my site as well.
And I love your podcast, by the way. If your numbers have gone up, I take full credit because I've listened to every episode that you've put out, and some of them a couple times. So it's an amazing podcast, guys. Definitely check out Junaid. Also check him out on Facebook. He's so affable. You can find him on Facebook, and usually if you message him, he usually gets right back. So make sure that you're checking out Junaid. And I'm learning every day. I just picked up a couple ideas as we're talking that I'm going to implement once we hang up. So, and guys, if you're interested, stay for about another hour. I'm interviewing a gentleman. His name is Anik, Anik. He has over 1 million followers just on Facebook. So, guys, if you're interested in talking about business, Anik is going to be dropping some knowledge, bro. So, Junaid, I just want to say thank you for your friendship all these years, and I'm so grateful for you and your family.
Absolutely, man. Thanks again, Richard, for this conversation, this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
I love it, guys. So make sure you check out Junaid. Make sure his Facebook. Make sure you go to his podcast. And guys, this episode is going to be on verticalmomentumpodcast.com. So make sure you check it out, like it, and share it. And remember, vertical momentum, the only way to go is but up. And I love you guys. Junaid, have an amazing week, brother.
Thanks, Richard. Bye.